Joe Cater and the Real Girl, Chapter 3, A Serving with Cheese Pizza. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and Joe Cater found himself lounging on the couch with his beloved companion, Josephine, his anatomically correct sex doll girlfriend. The two of them had decided to treat themselves to a quiet day at home, indulging in their favorite pastime, ordering pizza and binge-watching old movies. With a flick of his wrist, Joe dialed the number for their favorite pizza place, his mouth watering in anticipation of the cheesy goodness that awaited them. He placed their usual order, a large cheese pizza with extra cheese, and settled back on the couch, a contented smile playing at the corners of his lips. As they waited for their pizza to arrive, Joe and Josephine whiled away the time in idle conversation, their voices mingling together in a symphony of shared intimacy. To Joe, there was no one else in the world who understood him quite like Josephine did, her silent presence a comforting balm to his weary soul. But as the minutes stretched into hours, Joe couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. Where was their pizza? It had never taken this long for their order to arrive before. Just as Joe was about to pick up the phone and inquire about the status of their delivery, there was a sharp knock at the door, a sound that sent a jolt of apprehension coursing through his veins. With a furrowed brow, Joe rose from the couch and made his way to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. But when he swung open the door, he was met not by a delivery person holding a steaming box of pizza, but by a stern-faced man in a suit, a sheaf of papers clutched tightly in his hand. "Joseph Cater?" the man asked, his voice crisp and authoritative. Joe nodded, his stomach churning with a sense of dread. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The man handed Joe the papers, his expression unreadable. "You've been served," he said simply, before turning on his heel and disappearing down the hallway. With trembling hands, Joe unfolded the papers and began to read, his eyes widening in disbelief as the words on the page came into focus. It was a court order, a summons to appear in court on charges of pizza theft. Confusion washed over Joe in a tidal wave of disbelief. Pizza theft? What on earth did that even mean? He glanced over at Josephine, who remained seated on the couch, her expression frozen in a serene smile. "Did we steal pizza, Josephine?" Joe asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Josephine remained silent, her glass eyes staring blankly ahead as though lost in thought. Joe shook his head in disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake. Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Joe wasted no time in contacting his lawyer, a gruff but capable man named Frank, who had helped him out of more than one legal jam in the past. After a lengthy conversation with Frank, during which Joe recounted the events of the day in painstaking detail, the truth finally began to emerge. A truth that was more bizarre than anything Joe could have ever imagined. Joe's world came crashing down around him as the reality of the situation sank in. It couldn't be true, could it? But the evidence presented in the court order was damning. Allegations of downloading illegal content, specifically pictures of cheese pizzas. His mind reeled with disbelief, his heart heavy with a sense of betrayal and shame. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed himself to be drawn into such darkness? As the gravity of the situation dawned on him, Joe felt sick to his stomach, his thoughts racing with 1,000 questions and doubts. He turned to Josephine, his companion through thick and thin, seeking solace in her silent presence. But this time, there was no comfort to be found. Josephine's expression remained unchanged, her glass eyes staring blankly ahead as though unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had transpired. With a heavy heart, Joe knew that he had to face the consequences of his actions. He reached out to his lawyer, Frank, hoping against hope that there had been some mistake, that he had been framed or hacked or anything to absolve him of the guilt that threatened to consume him. But as Frank delved deeper into the case, it became clear that there was no mistake. The evidence was overwhelming, the trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight back to Joe's computer. Desperate and alone, Joe found himself consumed by a sense of despair unlike anything he had ever experienced before. How could he ever hope to atone for the sins he had committed? How could he ever face himself, or anyone else, ever again? As the days turned into weeks, Joe retreated further and further into himself, his world shrinking to a pinpoint of darkness amidst the chaos that surrounded him. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, he couldn't even look himself in the mirror without feeling a sense of revulsion at the monster staring back at him. And all the while, the specter of the courtroom loomed ever larger in his mind, a looming reminder of the punishment that awaited him, the shame and disgrace that would follow him for the rest of his days. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged, a faint whisper of redemption that stirred within Joe's soul. With each passing moment, he felt a flicker of something deep within him, a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. With newfound resolve, Joe made a decision to face his demons head-on, to confront the darkness that threatened to consume him and emerge on the other side a changed man. He reached out to Frank once more, determined to plead guilty and accept whatever punishment the court saw fit to mete out. And as the day of his trial arrived, Joe stood before the judge, his heart heavy with regret and remorse. He spoke of his actions with humility and contrition, begging for forgiveness and vowing to do whatever it took to make amends for the harm he had caused. But even as he awaited the judge's verdict, Joe couldn't shake the feeling that his journey was far from over, that the road ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with challenges and obstacles that would test his resolve to the breaking point. And as the gavel fell, sealing his fate, Joe knew that the true test of his character had only just begun. For in the crucible of his own suffering, he would find the strength to rise from the ashes of his past and forge a new path, a path illuminated by the light of redemption and guided by the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. But little did Joe know that the greatest challenges and revelations were yet to come, that the trials he faced would test him in ways he could never have imagined. And as he ventured forth into the unknown, he knew that the fate of not only himself, but of all those he held dear, hung in the balance, poised on the edge of a precipice from which there could be no return.